Hello, welcome back to From Soft Serve. Today we're in Bloodborne because I've released version 0.8 of my Bloodborne Remaster project mod, which is quite the mouthful. And you can download it on Nexus mods today, or on my Patreon. I do have the Google Drive link for it, since it is like 9 gigabytes now, so it's a little big and, a little quicker, and $5 a month if you want to. But Nexus mods, if you have Nexus mods Premium, it's pretty quick actually. So anyway, we're in the unmodded game here first in Old Yarnum because I wanted to show parallax occlusion mapping that I've added in my mod. So on this ground surface here, we see these rocks, and they have a little bit of depth to them. But if you pan the camera like this, you can very clearly see it's just an actual completely flat surface, right? And, I'd still would say it looks really good, honestly. They have really good normal maps that FromSoft uses. And, pretty okay. But turns out there was a hidden little height map stored inside that normal map that FromSoft had made but went unused in the actual released game. The other thing we're going to take a look at is while we're here, because you can see this stone textures, or this little rock texture on the ground is used in a lot of places in Old Yarnum. But we also have this wall surface here, which you can see is actually completely flat. But once again, it has a normal map that is simulating the depth really well, honestly. But once again, parallax occlusion mapping is the next step up for like perceived depth. You can get away with normal maps, and they do, because in Elden Ring they only use normal maps. Frankly, I have seen zero parallax in Elden Ring thus far. But let's swap over to my mod. Okay, let's kill this jabroni. I'm now in the modded game. Oh, you can definitely see it's darker, mostly because of the dynamic shadows, but also auto exposure changes. But let's turn on the torch here, and now you can see that they protrude from the ground fantastically well. I had to modify the height map because by default it was way too strong. Let's also kill this jabroni. Whenever I switch to the other install of the game I have, all the enemies come back. It's delightful. And so now you can see on this stone wall, it has much more depth because obviously we've enabled parallax occlusion mapping. This one I actually made a height map for it, but this rock texture you see on the ground here, this is a height map that FromSoft themselves made, but it was too contrasty and thus looked not great in game. Maybe that's why they didn't use it, I don't know, but they tend to not use parallax occlusion mapping other than like 5 surfaces in the whole game. But they had created height maps for many things. They just didn't end up using it for either performance reasons or I don't know really. DS2 has a similar case where they had a ton of parallax occlusion mapping they could have used, but they did not. But now we have this wonderfully geometric rock surface now as you walk through Old Yarnum, which is sick nasty. If I do say so myself, I do have to go through all the models and activate it because, for instance, this area here is one map piece for the ground, and then if you run far enough, it turns into another map piece. And so I actually have to go in and enable that, and then change the buffer layouts, which is just a bunch of text and numbers, and you change that to allow the parallax to show up. And it's a whole thing. But that is one thing I've added in the version 0.8. Some more in Central Yarnum, some more in Cathedral Ward, and then of course here, some more in Old Yarnum. But if we dip out of here, if we bone out, there's another change that I've done in this version, which is mostly centered in Central Yarnum at the moment. And that is due to how Bloodborne handles the shading of surfaces. By default, Bloodborne is very metallic-y, shiny looking on everything, which is not great. And that's because back in 2014 and around that time, or 2015 I guess when it came out, they were still grappling with a physically based rendering setup, right? And a lot of the industry was too, admittedly. And so let's go to Central Yarnum. Now we'll see if this works because I am using a 1440p patch. I normally run the game at 1080p because I've had texture issues occasionally with 1440p and just more issues in general. So I tend to just run it at default resolution. Yeah, it's doing that thing again where the sky turns freaky as hell. Pretty funny looking. Yeah, okay, let me get out of the 1440p patch. Alright, we're back. We're in the unmodded game here. I decided to go to the unmodded game first to show you what the surface looks like. Let's kill these jabronis, because we don't like them. They're hanging out. They're kind of just vibing, so I probably shouldn't kill them, but you know what? Too bad. So basically, Bloodborne, the surfaces have a metallic sheen on most everything, to be honest. That's because they're physically based rendering setup with the reflectance maps, which is our focus today. And then they have the shininess maps, normal maps, albedo maps. And essentially, they just had weird RGB values that made everything a little bit more metallic and shiny than it should be. They only fixed this in Sekiro and onward, where they figured out the different RGB values to have for different maps. And so essentially what I'm doing, and this is all thanks to Trivia, who is my modding sort of mutual, essentially. She's helped me with so many things, and textures and normal maps, and just so many things have been just incredibly helpful. So she basically messaged me and said, hey, do you want to know how to fix Bloodborne's like weird metallic problem? And I was like, yes. And it turns out it was a whole math thing, and it's industry-wide RGB values for the reflectance maps. And so here you can see we're in the unmodded game, and you can see this surface here is very, very shiny and has specularity. Now the puddles, obviously there's wetness, so you know it makes sense to have things be wet, but our focus is more on how it is responding to that light, and a lot of it is very metallic. Now this street lamp here is metallic, so it makes sense to have, you know, a certain sheen to it, right? But I think the best example is this little pillar here that's part of the fencing. So the fencing is obviously metal, so it should act like metal does. But then you'll notice the pillar also has a metallic shine to it, despite it being stone, right? And that's kind of Bloodborne's problem in a nutshell. So let's look at this pillar, and you can see how it's responding to the light from above, from the actual sky. And it's very metallic looking. And if we go over to this other pillar, right here, you can see it is also reacting in a very metallic fashion, despite it being a stone-like structure. It's not actually metallic at all, but it is acting as if it is metallic. And even this little part here, you know, it's all acting like metal, where it's not specifically metal. So let's swap to the modded version of the game. And we're back in the modded version of the game. And now you can see on this ground here, basically the little like stone little brick portions are now less metallic looking, and they're still wet looking, but now there's a much greater difference between them and the actual puddle, which has the water on it, or moistness. And so you just get a better difference between what is specifically wet and what is not, and what is supposed to be stone versus metal. Let's go check out the pillar over here. And now you'll notice in my version, of course, there's a point light that's attached to the street lamp. But now you'll notice the actual stone pillar here now has a much greater difference between the metal on the fencing and then how it's responding to the light. It's responding much more like stone would, where the specularity is just less noticeable. So it's very subtle. Let's go check over on this pillar here, which once again basically it has tamped down on the metallic look on this pillar, and now it more closely represents stone. It's very subtle. You'll even notice on this little stone, these little statue thingies, dog, bird, something statues, they now look actually like stone. They still have a certain sheen to them, but it's just less than it was essentially. That's the goal. Can we have surfaces that stone looks like stone, metal looks like metal, glass looks like glass? That's the goal. But is it massively altering the look of Bloodborne? No. That's the key. And I have to do it texture by texture, and it's a fairly simple process of basically just changing the RGB values of the reflectance map itself. And honestly, I think it looks really good. We can take a little walk through Central Yarnum, since this is how the game is going to look if you download the mod on Nexus. And I'm running it at 1080p 30 FPS because the 60 FPS, even with my new 4060 Ti, I haven't noticed much performance increase in Bloodborne. So I'll sometimes get 60, sometimes get 35, 45, 50, and that variable frame rate I really don't like. So I run it at the native 30 FPS because a stable 30 for me is always preferable to a very, very unstable 60. And so the emulator still has not had a lot of performance optimizations, right? And so that's kind of a key part that is missing. So that's why you'll notice I run it at 30 FPS. I've had people ask about that. It's like, there's a benefit that like I already ran Bloodborne I was used to it at 30 FPS. So for me, it's not like some huge difference. But yeah, so here's a good example. If you can see, there still is good specularity coming off these on this ground surface. So you're not losing that. I think that's the key. That when I talked about this previously in other videos, I would refer to it as Bloodborne being wet, when that's not really the accurate way to talk about it, because the wet part is intentional. But how they were handling the RGB values was a bit off. And so now you get just a greater difference between the puddles on the ground here, which should be wet, but then the areas that are not are more standard stone looking, right? That's really all this is meant to do. There's one other area we can look at, which I will go back into the original unmodded version of the game, but we're going to run past here. We'll see if we've killed most of the jabronis, which I think we have. Let's see. Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? Wow, you guys got a real party going on. Okay, I'm just going to go up here. Okay, almost shot me. Okay, well, I'll definitely have to kill you guys. I hope you don't mind. Also in the description, I will link the build I'm currently using of Shad PS4, which I believe is from yesterday, or the day before that, and it's been really good. This has probably been the best build thus far. It's a specific build by Diego, who packages a lot of the updates together, and so it's obviously not their work as far as like all the emulator updates, but they basically do pull requests and package a lot of the different various like disparate updates to the emulator build, so that way we get the fog and the fire effects and all the things I want, where a lot of the main versions of the mod or of the emulator won't have that yet, as it has not been merged into the main. But yeah, basically let's log out and go back to the original version of the game. All right, we're back in, and that guy's seemingly having a seizure, which is not cash money. So yeah, here we go. We have this is kind of the perfect area because it has a street lamp, which is metal. Obviously, we can tell by the material response on it. That's obviously metal. And then we have these little stone thingamajiggies plus the statue here praying to somebody. And you can see they exhibit less of a metallic shine than the actual street lamp, of course, but even still, they still respond a little bit closer to metal than I would like. And so in my mod, I alter the reflectance maps to fix that or tamp down. Now, I freely admit that this is subtle. A lot of my work is subtle. And that's mostly by design, but because I want to be careful, right? I don't want to completely alter Bloodborne and make it look unrecognizable. So let's switch back to the modded version of the game. Okay, and we're back. And so now you can see, now it is subtle, as I said before, but you can see that now it's exhibiting less of a metallic shine to it. Very subtly, but it looks more like stone. In this, I have not touched the reflectance map for the street lamp at all, and so it still looks very metallic, but now there's a greater difference between the two different surfaces, and it just looks less metal. And that's the other thing you'll notice when you look at this actual post that we were looking at earlier. As you can see now, it is very much just a stone pillar, and it does not have that metallic shine as much to it. And then the fencing still looks just like metal. So basically stone looking like stone, metal looking like metal, glass looking like glass. That is the goal of this. And it's careful and sort of subtle, obviously, because I'm going surface by surface. But basically you just get a better, I think, variation between the puddles and the actual ground that's in between them. And I think that actually looks better. Also, I love this little spot for the mod because you get to walk through here and you get to see the shadows actually cascade over your player character. Because I have the light mask turned off, and so in the base game, your character will just be dark the whole time if they think you're shadowed. And these dynamic shadows, of course, did not even exist in the unmodded game. So these are dynamic shadows that are hitting the player, and they look absolutely gorgeous. They're not the highest resolution of all time, but it actually gives them sort of a soft appearance that is more realistic than if they were like pin sharp. But yeah, this is my favorite thing in my mod, is the fact that you can just walk through shadows like this and have it naturally go over your player, where in the base game that didn't exist for the most part, because there were also not many dynamic shadows at all on anything. And you also had a player mask, where the player mask, I've talked about this in the previous video, but while I'm here, the player mask was something that was in the G params, where, so basically because the whole game, and most games, are lit by baked lighting, which is just a texture that's applied to the surface, so it's not an actual light source, it's not actual shadows, it's basically painted onto the surface to say, this is a shadow. And so what the game would basically, if your character stepped into the darkness enough, it would darken the character completely. And it was on or off. Basically, it was your character shadowed or he is not shadowed at all. And the player mask, once you turn that off, you actually can get, sort of, it will now be accurately shadowed for only that should be shadowed. And then obviously it's lit, depending on the shadow itself. So it's just much more accurate. And yeah, I think it looks sick nasty, as the kids would say. But yeah, that's one of the other updates. Beyond that, we can warp out here with my hunter's mark, or bone out. I actually say that when I leave events or parties or anything. I go, hey, I got a bone out. Big dog. I gotta go. Let's go to Cathedral Ward, because that is another thing that's in the mod update, is I placed more point lights on light sources that didn't have them, but should have them. I don't think I can go to I can't go to the Grand Cathedral currently, because the Bloody Crow of Canehurst is currently hanging out. A squatter, if you will. Also probably the hardest enemy in the entire game. But this character has like infinite health almost. It's like a debug-ish character. So let's head through here. Cathedral Ward has also had the Reflectance map upgrades to sort of change the material properties a little bit. Once again, super subtle. So I don't blame anyone who sees this and goes, I don't notice a difference. And I go, that is perfectly fine for me. I would actually prefer that be the case, because I don't want people to see it and then go, oh my god, they're changing the way Bloodborne looks, and I hate that. So I am just making tiny little changes, which I think over time have sort of grown into something more substantial than just one change on its own. So it's sort of very over time kind of thing. So in Cathedral Ward here, you can see he gave up. This light source, actually, hold on. I've changed my mind. We're going to go back to the unmodded game. It's going to look a lot better if I do that. Okay, hold on. All right, we're back in the unmodded version of the game, and you can see this little street lamp thingamajiggy here, and it has actual, like a particle effect, showing that it is obviously lit, but is that illumination actually hitting the rest of the model, basically? So let's go down here for a better example. And so you can see we're shrouded in darkness here, and this street lamp has the particle effect, but there's actually no illumination coming off of it at all. So there's no light that's hitting anything else. And you'll notice that on every other one that's lit, there's basically just illumination that's missing. And maybe I'm just a sicko and I'm the only one that noticed it, because I didn't notice it until I was modding the game, and I was like, oh shit, there's actually no illumination coming off these. There's just that sort of effect that goes, hey, it's lit. And some of them are not lit, of course, because they picked which ones were lit or not, and you can change that by one value in DS Map Studio / Smithbox. So here's a good look at these lanterns, or lamps, with no illumination tied to them. And let's switch over to my mod to see the difference. Alright, we're back in my modded version of the game, and as you can see now, the street lamps actually have illumination tied to them, so the light from that is actually hitting the little weird statue person that's holding it, and you can see that on those as well. And yeah, it's overly, overall subtle, but I think it's a nice little, realism boost. Not that Bloodborne needs a realism boost, but it's something that, like, if there is a light source, then it has illumination from it. And basically, I'm using the other examples in the game to make that decision, right? Because there are other light sources that are similar to this that did have point lights attached to them, or a point light baked into the actual particle effect itself, where it did have illumination coming off of it. And so then I just basically am doing what they did elsewhere, but there were certain light sources that just didn't have light actually coming off of them. So essentially I'm just fixing that. That's it. And is the difference from adding these point lights? Not that I've noticed. I think any modern GPU is not going to have an issue, because they're not shadow casting. That is something I did not turn on for them, because it's not worth it, and the light source is not big enough anyway to stretch down to where the character would be to have a character shadow, and it really just wouldn't benefit the game. And so yeah, I don't do that. So I'm still keeping that in mind of, like, well, that's not good for performance, and it also is useless. In this case, this light source is just not a good match for that. But I think it still looks really good without any shadowing. You're still getting light that's hitting the surrounding environment. And I just think it looks better, IMO. And yeah, so those are the main kind of things in patch, well, not patch 0.8, but version 0.8. There's a link down below if you want to download that, try it out. Beyond that, you're getting upgraded textures, dynamic shadows, better texture LODs. The shadows have been massively pushed out in their quality to handle having dynamic shadows for the whole world. I had to alter that a lot, G-params edited, and a lot of other stuff. So if you want to download the mod, there's a link down below. And I'll see you on the next video or stream.